I would first like to start with a little personal story. And I took this picture a couple of years ago when I was visiting Baarle-Nassau. And Baarle-Nassau is a really interesting place. And the funny thing about this picture is that the buildings on the left are in Belgium, and the buildings on the right are in the Netherlands. And well, in and of itself is not like a really special thing, it's just a border, right? But the actual border to enter Belgium is about 7 kilometers further away. And this is possible because of something called enclaves or enclaves in Dutch. And this is a map of Baarle-Nassau and its Belgium counterpart, Baarle-Hertog. And here you can see the deep yellow parts are Belgium. And an enclave is basically a part of a country completely surrounded by another country. So quite fascinating. So here you can see all these parts of Belgium in the Netherlands. And then you even have something called a counter-enclave, which is a piece of a country inside an enclave. So it's a country inside a country inside a country. So it's fascinating to walk here. And you even have this liquor store. It's called a biergrens or beer border. And the border goes straight to the shop. And of course, the register is in Belgium because of the lower taxes on alcohol. But yeah, so when walking to Baarle-Nassau and Baarle-Hertog, you can see these borders on the streets everywhere. And you can see them, but in the end, they don't really matter, right? Okay, both sides have different rules, but you can freely go across the border and you barely even notice them anymore. But today I'm here to talk to you about React, and specifically React Server Components. But I'll get to that. First, I would like to do a little show of hands. Who here knows about React? Okay, so almost everybody, that's nice. Who here has actually used React before? All right, so almost everybody, I think 70% or something, 80%. Who here has used React on the server, like with a framework, Next.js, Remix, something like that? All right, maybe 10 hands, something like that. And who here knows everything there is to know about React Server Components? No. So I also put my hands down, and that's because React Server Components, well, it's an active development, and it's quite new. Frameworks are still trying to figure this thing out, but I'm here to give you an introduction today about the stuff that React has come up with, and yeah. I think React Server Components is the biggest change to React since like the start of React, so that says quite a lot. And it's a completely new way of writing React, and you do this on the server. Good to know, you don't have to use React Server Components. It's still backwards compatible. You can still use React as you use it today, but you can. You can use React on the server. First question maybe, oh, sorry. So this is on the docs. Server components are a new type of component that render ahead of time before bundling in an environment separate from your client, app, or SSR server. So this is what we're going to talk about today. So React Server Components render on the server, they stay on the server, and the question is like, well, why? Why would you want to render React on the server? And I'm going to talk about two problems that in which you might want to run React on the server. So first, data fetching. And data fetching is quite hard for front-end UI. There are lots of things to consider when rendering or when data fetching on the clients, like questions like how to get the exactly the right data for UI in your UI. And there are a couple of patterns here you can use, like GraphQL or backend from frontend, or like JSON API specifically created to serve data to your frontend. And then also the question like how to manage states and like old data, dedupe requests if you have multiple the same fetch calls in your component tree. And there are also a ton of libraries to help you with this. But this shows like this is a complex problem, right? Yeah. And then also you can data fetch on the server for your React app. And there are a lot of frameworks that try to help you with this. And they are basically answering the question how to get your data into your React components when data fetching on the server. And these frameworks have to solve this, right? So they have, Next.js, for example, has get server-side props, or Remix has loaders. And most frameworks try to solve this data fetching thing on the route level. So based on what route you are, you get a certain like kind of data. And the next problem is bundle size. So it's kind of been accepted to send like tons of JavaScript to the client right now. And this is a graph of like the page weight over time. And this like the page weight is like the amount of kilobytes you have to download before you can show and view a page. And you can see this going up and up and up throughout the years. Well, we have a reliable internet right here, but there are a lot of countries that don't have reliable internet, or where internet is quite expensive, for example. So this is really a problem. Yeah. So I'm going to start off by talking about data fetching. And when I'm talking about data fetching, I'm talking about getting data, but also maybe mutating data, like doing a post request somewhere, mutating data somewhere. To make any web application work, you'll have to have three things. A server. This can be a backend server, like that renders dynamic stuff. Or this can be a content delivery network, CDN, to have only serve static files or something. Then you have to have a client, and I'm referring to the physical device of a user. This device has a browser on it on which you can surf the web. And lastly, also quite important, you have to have a network. And this network makes sure the client and the server can communicate. And I'm going to talk about data fetching in two different rendering strategies right now. And these are existing rendering strategies. So we have client-side rendering and server-side rendering. And when I put this in this model, right, and when I'm talking about rendering, I'm talking about the stuff that you actually see in the browser. And these are some of like the client-side frameworks that do the rendering on the client side. So here you can see React, but also a couple of others. And then on the server side, you maybe have like more traditional or backend frameworks that, not traditional, sorry, like backend oriented frameworks that do a rendering of the UI on the server. And then you also have some front-end frameworks that do rendering on the server. And this is mostly rendering UI and then passing it off to the client again. Kind of like a hybrid of those. And when I'm talking about client-side rendering, this is a term you maybe know, single-page application. And this is the type of application that does client-side rendering. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how it works. So that's this one, the client. And React sits here, by the way, on the client right now. And I wanted to show you the process for the browser, what it is to browse a single-page application. So the user can click a link, and the browser says, "Hey, can I see this page?" It says that to some kind of server, content delivery network or something, static files. And then the server, the CDN says, like, I don't know what that is, but here's the file sent to everyone. It's an index.html file. And the index.html file can look something like this. So it's basically an empty file. There's nothing really in there, except for reference to some JavaScript there. And the browser knows what to do with this JavaScript. It downloads all the JavaScript. And we're talking about data fetching. So somewhere in this JavaScript is this piece of React code. And this piece of React code is basically data fetching from somewhere. And it has to wait for the data fetch to finish. So then first it shows a loading state. And then when the data fetch has finished, it shows the actual content. So React figures out what to render and then renders it. So once the data has loaded, I put a comment here, but this will be like the actual HTML of the page, and then the user sees an actual page. This is a key example. Like, we're talking about browsers now, but we make products for users, right? So the user is quite important here. So I'm also going to talk about the process for the user, or what the user experiences. And I'm going to do that based on this demo application right here. Yeah, it's an application with some organizations and then some projects, basic application, blank screen. And that's the empty HTML from before, right? So the browser first has to download all this JavaScript, parse this JavaScript, and then once this is done, they can see a loading state or a skeleton. And a skeleton is basically a loading state. And this is actually a pretty good page, right? It gives feedback to the user, and you can see where stuff might be coming in. And then some data comes in, and it shows it there. Some featured projects come in, and then you have the full page. But making good skeleton screens, like making good loading screens, is quite hard, so maybe you'll actually see this. So the characteristics of a single page application, to summarize: the JavaScript contains all the logic. There's no initial HTML. There's also no runtime, so no like web server, dynamic web server generating the HTML. It's just a static file server. And the data comes from somewhere else, so not from the front end, right? The data has to come from somewhere. This can be an API or backend for front end, GraphQL, something. So an example, you maybe have a .NET a backend, and then over the network goes JSON. This, by the way, the JSON logo. And then on the client is React. So they talk to each other through JSON. All right. So that's the single page application. Yeah, so then I'm going to talk about server-side rendering, SSR, with hydration. I'm going to come to that in a bit. And how that works with React. And I've taken Next.js as an example because that is a front-end framework that does something on the server. So this is the empty page from before, and some brilliant minds thought, like, okay, how can we improve this for the user? Like, this can't be our first experience. When you click a link, it's not really good. And also there are some other benefits to server-side rendering, but okay. So why not render the first load on the server? So when a user clicks the link, first load is on the server. We basically render the single page application on the server first, then we send it to the client, and then from there the client can take over. So that's what we did. So that looks like this. First you have the .NET API on the back end. This can still serve like the actual data, but then also you have this front-end framework on the back end, which then sends HTML over the network, and then React takes over on the client here, and then starts communicating over the network through JSON with the .NET API. Yeah, and I feel like this is, and I'm going to come to hydration in a bit, sorry. But I feel like SSR is maybe an afterthought. Like, yeah, sure, it's great, but it's not like a first-party thing of React and of our like front-end world. It's just a bandage on this problem. And to look at the process for the browser for server-side rendering here, the user clicks a link. Hey, can I see this page, right? And the front-end framework now needs to know something about the route because it needs to generate the HTML for the route. So the server says, sure, here it is, an actual HTML page. And this is like the actual HTML of the page rendered on the server here. And then on the client, React takes over, and then following renders or following like links are actually rendered on the client here. And to get the data or like to render the HTML into the or get the data into the HTML, sorry. Next.js, for example, does something like get server-side props. You can fetch some data, pass it to the page. This kind of like framework magic there, or like framework implementation of how to get the data into the React components. And also you have to know now at the route level what data your components need. So it's not really component-based anymore. So then what the user experiences. Hey, first again a blank screen. And this is now because the server is now actually waiting for the fetch requests to come in first. By the way, this isn't quite an exaggeration because it can be quite fast, right? But I wanted to make sure these are the actual steps. And the next step is actually like just see the entire page here, because the server actually like rendered the initial HTML. And then React on the client takes over, so then for next renders you may have these loading states again, but for the first render it's not the loading states. So to summarize the characteristics of SSR, I have to explain the hydration part is when React takes over on the client. That's called hydration. So the characteristics here, the page contains initial HTML, and the initial HTML can be dynamic, and that's because it knows something about the route or the request of the server. But then again, it needs a server, so a web server to generate the HTML. And also JavaScript contains all logic because React takes over on the client side again. So it's basically a client-side rendering after the first page load. And then so the React team thought, hey, we can do this better, of course. So, React Server Components. React Server Components are a new way of writing React. And when you use a framework that uses React Server Components, React now stays on the server by default. So if you create a component, this is now automatically a server component. And a server component looks something like this. Can anyone see here what's special about this component? Yes?
It's asynchronous.
It's asynchronous, yeah, that's right. So it's async await. And first time I saw this as like a React developer, it blew my mind. Like components can be asynchronous because it has to render immediately, right? It has to know what to render. But since we're on the server now, we can just await the component, right? So that's really special. And then to finish off the implementation here, the get results is basically the same as the get server-side props from before. But now you can call this as a function inside our component. And there's no framework magic anymore. It's just a function call. I'll skip to how the browser works for now. I'll be back to that. And then so to put it in this diagram, it looks something like this. We can still have our .NET API on the backend, like our entire backend infrastructure. And then we have the React Server Components enabled framework also on the server. And then over the network goes React. React has this special format for React Server Components. And also React on the client then knows what to show. And so an actual implementation might look something like this. So we now do homepage content, get results there, and then do something with this suspense thingy over there. And suspense is a component that React offers. And it's basically, okay, wait for everything in this suspense component. And in the meantime, show this instead, show this fallback instead. So it's a way to wait on components. And suspense also enables HTML streaming. So like streaming parts of a page to the user when data comes in. So then the process for the browser is becoming. The user clicks a link. Hey, can I see this page? And the server says, sure, here is the first part, but please wait, maybe there is more. So it gets the first part of the HTML page. And that will look something like this. Okay, I'm going to this real quick, but it has the HTML of like the skeleton, the loading state over here. And then maybe a couple of milliseconds later, it comes with this, the actual HTML and some small script to switch it out. And then the end of the page. So it sends this in parts. And then the full thing will look something like this. So we now have loading states, feedback to the user, without having to load a bunch of JavaScript first, and without needing to wait on the server for all these fetch requests to come in. So then what the user experiences becomes this. Like the initial HTML is super fast to render, because there is no need to wait on a fetch request to finish. And then parts of the page start coming in again. So we have this good experience still. Granted that you do still have to create the skeleton components, by the way. But because the suspense boundaries, you have some variation with the suspense boundaries where you put those, so you have a little bit more control over where you want to put your loading states. So that's also good. Yeah. So the server is now integrated into the core of React. So React knows about the existence of a server and knows how to deal with a server. But of course, there are also some limitations to this. So limitations to the React Server Components. React Server Components, they render on the server. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. But that does mean like hooks cannot be used in server components. Like hooks are ways to manage state in our client or like use effect to do something on the client. Like none of that can be done in a server component. Also, no access to browser APIs. All of this is quite logical because we are still on the server, right? Yeah, but then this is a good example of a component that needs some client interactivity, right? It has a state, it has an event handler, so when the user clicks a button, it does the set count, and then the UI can update the count over there. So how do we deal with this? Well, of course, React has thought about this as well. And it has come up with this, use client. So you put this at the top of the file, use client, and then you actually say to React like, hey, this piece of code right here, we want to use this on the client. And suddenly now this works on the client. So these are now called client components. So basically the React components we know and love today have a new name, and they are called client components. And let me go back real quick. The use client here, I see this as like a door or a portal, right? A portal from the server to the client. And yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And this also solves another problem, bundle size. Because now we can actually tell React or tell what JavaScript we need on the server or on the client, sorry, like what is essential for our application and what is not. So I'm gonna do a quick demo over here. So bear with me. I have my demo application, and this is the application from before. When I reload the page, you can see the data starts coming in. There's our mock API behind this one. And this is all rendered on the server. So this is all React Server Components right here. But let's say we wanted to filter this projects table, right? And filter this projects table on the client. So maybe sort it by name or sort it by description, something like that. Well, we'll need some client-side interactivity for that. So this is the page here, and I'm using Next.js because Next.js supports a React Server Components right now. So here you can see we have a suspense boundary with the featured projects, and then we have this project's data table. And I also created a different data table. Is it visible? Okay, yeah, it's quite visible. I also created this client one. So I'll create this, I'll do this client one over here, and then I'll refresh the page, and now you can see there's this little sortable thingy over here. So when I now click this, it's sortable. Wow, okay, I was expecting applause right here, but no, but no, but you all know React, so you know, okay, this is possible in React already. Like, this is no big deal, right? But under the hood, because of this, I have it right here. This is the used client. This is the data table right here. So because of that used client, React now sends this JavaScript bundle to the client, and it automatically becomes interactive, right? And then I didn't have to even think about, right? I almost didn't have to think about, except for the used client, maybe. Yeah, and so we can just sort it right here. Yeah, and I wanted to maybe do a little sneak peek into another subject. I'm not going to get into it right now, but you might also want to go from the client to the server again. So maybe in this example, maybe you want to remember the sorting preference for the user, right? So this can be a case, right? So I created this function right here. It's called set projects data table sorting, and I'm going to comment this out right here. So this is the client code here that sets the sorting, and then also let me comment this out right here. So I was passing the sorting like hard coded here, but I'm going to now turn this over to getting the data table sorting. All right, and this is the magic right here. So this is the function I imported, the set project data table sorting. This has the use server on the top of the file. I'm not going to get into it quite a bit, but this basically says, okay, I was on the client, but now I want to use the server again. Yeah, so let's try if it works. So I'm going to reload again. Maybe sort it by description here. I'm going to refresh the page, and then it remembered my sort. Thank you, thank you. Nice. All right, to recap. React Server Components is a new name or for a new paradigm in React, a new way of writing React applications. And the standard React components we know today, they are now called client components when talking about this new paradigm. Server components only render on the server. Their code isn't included in the JavaScript bundle. They never hydrate, so they never become interactive, or they also never re-render. And also, React Server Components is not necessarily a replacement for server-side rendering, but more like a native way for React to now do server-side rendering. Yeah, but React does one more thing. So this is our example from before, or maybe a little bit simplified, the projects table. And here we get the projects, we await, because this is a server component. And then in the client component, we get the projects as props. So we just pass the data through props, right? Nothing really special, maybe. But we didn't have to create like an API endpoint. We know exactly what kind of data we need right here, so we can pass the exact data we need. So goodbye GraphQL. We can easily make sure we don't send too much data here. We can just use props. And then for the other way around, when we're in the client world and we want to do something on the server, we can now import the function, use the function. No need to create, oh yeah, and this is like the use server thing. You can just set some cookie over here. No need to create an API endpoint, a GraphQL mutation, TRPC call, something like that. We can just import the function. And so React kind of manages the network for us here, from server to client. And that kind of makes the network disappear. So, yeah, just like when I was walking in Nassau, the borders are there. There are rules to each of them, but you don't really notice them anymore. Thank you.